While the world was busy debating Africa, Burkina Faso was quietly turning garbage into computers and handing them to women who had never touched a keyboard in their lives. And Captain Traoré did this without a single dollar of foreign aid. This is not a story about charity. This is a story about a nation building its own digital future from the ground up. If you want the Africa they never show you on the news, subscribe right now. On March 14, 2026, in the capital city of Ouagadougou, a press conference took place that almost nobody in the Western world covered. No major news network sent a camera. No international outlet ran a headline. But what was announced that day inside Burkina Faso's Ministry of Digital Transition was something that development economists have been saying Africa needs for decades. For decades. Not aid, not donation, not foreign-funded programs, but a government that looks at what it already has and decides to use it differently. The program is called PROTAF, which stands for the Information and Communications Technology Program in Faso. Its recycling initiative, known internally as PROTAF Recyclage, started with a question that sounds almost too simple. What happens to all the computers that government offices stop using? In most countries, the answer is nothing good. Equipment sits in storage rooms collecting dust, gets sold for parts at a loss, or ends up as electronic waste polluting land and water. Burkina Faso, under the current transitional government, decided to ask a different question entirely. What if those machines could be rebuilt and given to people who have never owned one? The pilot project collected surplus and outdated hardware directly from public administration offices. The initial haul included 30 computers, 30 keyboards, 30 central processing units, 30 mice 10 printers, and 10 inverters. These were not new machines. These were devices that government workers had already decided were no longer useful. A team of technicians working alongside the university students took that pile of discarded equipment and began the process of restoration. The results from this first phase were documented publicly. 22 central processing units were successfully rehabilitated. 10 functional screens were restored. 10 keyboards, 24 power cables, 12 video graphics array cables, and 5 mice were recovered and made operational. 5 additional screens that were still damaged were placed into continued repair. Wagner Zabo, the coordinator of PROTAF, described the philosophy behind the initiative in terms that deserve attention. He stated that the program was born from the belief that unused equipment can still serve others, and that recycling to support vulnerable groups brings real satisfaction to everyone involved. That framing matters because it represents a specific kind of governance logic, one that does not begin by asking what foreign partner will fund the next project, but instead asks what resources already exist within the system and how they can be redistributed with greater intention. The first beneficiaries were not chosen randomly. From March 16 to March 19, 2026, women in the town of Gossip received training in office software and internet use. 5 of the refurbished computers were provided directly to enable income-generating activities, with a specific focus on helping participants establish public secretariat services, essentially small businesses built around document preparation, printing, and digital assistance for community members. The target groups identified by the program included widows of members of the defense and security forces, women's associations, and other vulnerable populations who had been statistically excluded from the digital economy. This is where the analysis requires some precision, because the numbers involved in this pilot phase are small. 22 restored central processing units and 5 computers deployed to a single town does not on its own represent a digital transformation. Anyone looking for a reason to dismiss the program could find one easily in the raw figures. But that reading would miss what the program actually represents in terms of policy direction. The PROTAF initiative is one of 12 major projects operating under Burkina Faso's National Digital Transition Strategy. The broader plan includes the commissioning of 2 national data centers designed to ensure that government data is hosted within the country rather than on foreign servers. It includes a rural connectivity program targeting 750 additional towns currently classified as areas with no digital service coverage. And it includes a joint financing arrangement between the government and La Poste Burkina Faso to construct 20 public digital access hubs across the country, with a projected total investment of 5.5 billion West African CFA francs, which converts to approximately 9.7 million United States dollars, funded across the 2026 to 2030 planning period. What PROTAF Recyclage represents within that larger architecture is a proof of concept. It demonstrates that the government is willing to begin the process of digital inclusion using domestic resources before waiting for external financing. The Director of Communication and Press Relations at the Ministry of Digital Transition, Sombrina Jelika Drabo, described the citizen-led recycling initiative as perfectly aligned with the National Digital Transformation Strategy. The ministry has publicly reaffirmed its technical support for the program's expansion. The training component also introduced participants to a state-developed digital platform called Zama Che, which translates roughly to the Citizen's House. This platform is designed to facilitate access to public services through digital channels, reducing the need for citizens to travel to government offices for routine administrative tasks. Teaching women in rural areas to navigate this platform is not simply a literacy exercise. It is a deliberate attempt to reduce the friction between rural populations and state services. Friction that has historically been one of the primary reasons why formal institutions feel distant and irrelevant to people living outside of major urban centers. The question that this program raises, and that analysts observing Burkina Faso's governance trajectory will need to sit with, is whether an initiative that began with 30 recovered computers can scale in a meaningful way across a country facing significant security challenges, infrastructure deficits, and an ongoing humanitarian situation in multiple regions. The government's own 2026 to 2030 National Development Plan outlines ambitious targets across sectors, including digital infrastructure, but the gap between announced targets and measurable outcomes in similar contexts across the African continent has historically been wide. PROTAF Recyclage is too new to evaluate on the basis of impact data. What can be evaluated is the logic it operates on, which is that digital sovereignty begins not with the purchase of new technology from foreign suppliers, but with the decision to repair, redistribute, and teach using what already exists within the national system. That logic is not unique to Burkina Faso. Versions of it have been articulated by governments and civil society organizations across the continent for years. What makes the current moment in Ouagadougou worth watching is that this particular government has chosen to operationalize that logic at the level of formal state policy, with a named program, a documented pilot, and a published expansion roadmap at a time when the country is simultaneously navigating one of the most complex security and governance transitions in its modern history. The PROTAF Recyclage pilot is, by its own admission, a beginning. 30 computers collected, 22 restored, 30 women trained across 4 days in a single town. The scale is modest. The ambition encoded in the surrounding policy framework is considerably larger. Whether that ambition translates into measurable change without digital connectivity, for the women's associations waiting for the next phase of equipment distribution, or for the students being trained as technicians who will carry this program forward, remains an open question. What the data from March 2026 confirms is that a government operating under significant resource constraints made the deliberate choice to prioritize digital inclusion using domestic capacity. How that choice compounds over the next 4 years of the stated plan is the story worth continuing to follow. The story of PROTAF is not the only story like this coming out of Burkina Faso right now. The same government that restored 22 computers and handed them to women in Gausi is also building its first domestically engineered electric vehicle, restructuring its relationship with the gold mining sector, and implementing a $64 billion national development plan, that is $64 billion with a B, funded primarily through domestic revenue generation rather than foreign borrowing. Each of these stories follows the same underlying logic. Each of them is receiving the same level of coverage from major international outlets, which is to say almost none. This channel exists to change that. If you believe that the African continent's development decisions deserve the same depth of analysis that gets applied to policy decisions made in Washington or Brussels or Beijing, subscribe. New analysis drops regularly. The next story is already in production.